Justin Trudeau had dinner with Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago, the Canadian Prime Minister objecting to plans to impose tariffs on his country. The media are shocked, but Trump must have said 1,000 times during the campaign that he was going to impose stiff tariffs on such countries as China.
Yes, there are big economic issues at play here, but there are national security issues and life and death issues at play. He ran on this.
If you voted for Trump because you thought he was going to bring grocery prices down, I have some very bad news for you.
That's why you're still seeing some Republicans and some conservatives, like the Club for Growth and National Review, write column after column begging Trump to abandon this.
Joining us now from outside Palo Alto, Steve Hilton, the Fox News contributor, tech executive, and one-time British political advisor. Steve, we heard this again and again. It was never a secret that the press somehow not believed Donald Trump when he talked about imposing 25% tariffs on countries starting with China.
Well, we've also seen it before in the first Trump term, used incredibly successfully. We need to separate out two aspects of tariffs. There's the economic aspect, of course, and we can get into that. But the headlines are right now being made by the political aspect. I remember this very clearly in Trump's first term because about an hour or so before we went on air for my Sunday night show, Trump announced via tweet in response to caravans moving up through Central America and heading towards Mexico that unless Mexico did something about its southern border, he would impose 25% tariffs on Mexican goods and then it would increase every single week until something was done about it. Well, guess what happened? That week, the Mexican government sent troops to its southern border and actually did exactly what Trump had asked for. So they are a powerful tool in a political sense, not just in economic terms as well.
Well, when you've got Justin Trudeau flying to Mar-a-Lago to plead his case, doesn't this suggest that this is the beginning of the negotiations, which is an old real estate businessman's tactic, and that some of this may be worked out through, I know it's a dirty word, diplomacy?
Yes, and the reason that Trump rightly focuses on tariffs as a key component of his negotiating strategy, whether on political or economic questions, is because he has such great, to use a term he would appreciate, leverage. Because we are such a dominant economy that we actually have more power in these negotiations than anyone else because we're so productive. We have such a wide range of industries. We can actually use our economic strengths in so many different ways against so many other countries. And frankly, this is what he ran on. This is America first in economic policy.
Trump also says he had a good call with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, but she has a different spin on it, saying that nothing has really changed. And I understand the sensitivity here because Mexico and Canada are obviously closest neighbors, and certainly in the case of Canada, usually are American allies.
Well, exactly. And so, you know, the president of Mexico has her constituency and she needs to make sure that her position, particularly as a newly elected leader, is protected. But let's remember, again, going back to the precedent, we don't need to speculate. It was President Trump that renegotiated NAFTA and created the USMCA, which is actually in many ways very favorable to Mexico as well as to the US. And he did that based on understanding what the different parties in the negotiations need. It turned out to be good for our economy, and Mexico and Canada signed up to it. So it is possible to find a way through this that benefits all parties, and I'm sure that is what President-elect Trump is seeking to do.
Well, we can have a media debate about whether this will lead to a trade war, but the press clearly believes that it will mean higher prices for consumers. And Steve, a lot of economists agree with them.
Well, okay, well, here we are. First of all, when we look at the pundits and the media,
yes,
most of them are not economists, and they're just recycling talking points that they've picked up somewhere else. But even if you look at the economists,
they're just playing the role on television? No, of course they're not economists, but some business journalists understand this.
Who would imagine such a thing?
Yes, who would imagine?
No, that's true. But let's look at the economists, right? It reminds me of something that my economics professor at Oxford University used to tell me, which is that you could put all the economists in the world end to end and you'd never reach a conclusion. Why? Because economic theory doesn't necessarily match up to reality. And economists have models of what will happen in some future theoretical world, but it doesn't take account of the real world. So let's say you have tariffs imposed on foreign goods. That doesn't mean that prices immediately go up. That may mean, for example, that domestic providers find alternative sources, including from here in America. Let's just take one example. Let's imagine that there's some tariff against European goods, and champagne is blocked by the French. Well, we have perfectly good alternatives right here in California, up the road from me, in Sonoma and Napa. That's the point. America has abundance in everything, and we're in a very strong position to prosper from this new kind of approach to policy.
You see what he just did there, folks? He played the Oxford card. Now, with that accent, how do I respond to that? All right, stick around. When we come back, the press acts stunned that President Trump is no longer under indictment. Everyone in the media business knew it was coming, but acted like it was huge, stunning, eye-popping breaking news.
More breaking news. We just told you that Special Counsel Jack Smith had dropped the election subversion case against Donald Trump.
Special Counsel Jack Smith dropping his 2 major cases against Trump. Trump gets his get-out-of-jail-free card and sets his sights now on revenge.
The president-elect gets a hall pass from the special counsel.
This is a historic moment, certainly, in the sense that it clears the decks for President Trump on the federal cases.
Steve Hilton, of course, it had to be covered, but Jack Smith had been signaling for weeks that he was going to shut his operation down because of the DOJ policy against prosecuting sitting presidents. His alternative was to wait for Trump to fire him on January 20th. Who would want that?
Exactly. And this whole thing, Howie, just makes me laugh because how often have we heard that term, we need normalcy, a return to normalcy? This is normalcy, the normal precedent, which is that you can't prosecute sitting presidents. Of course, that will be the case from January the 20th onwards. So, as you say, this is entirely predictable and should have been predicted, but everything that Trump does and anything connected to Trump makes news. And I think that's particularly the case right now because we've seen such a vacuum on the other side from the actual president, because there's nothing really coming out of the current administration. Where is Biden? What's Kamala Harris doing other than putting out laughable videos that get mocked right across the internet? So there's no other game in town right now other than what's coming out of Mar-a-Lago and anything connected to it.
In media terms, you are right. Joe Biden did, however, manage to arrange a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. How much of a role have the media played, in your view, in exacerbating the divisions in this 50-50 country?
Well, look, I think that it's very easy to blame the media. I'm not sure that actually that represents the full truth here, because in the end, this is normal. This is partisan politics. I'm very used to it. You see it in the UK. You have raucous debates in the British Parliament and so on. And that is where we are. And of course, you could say that it's amplified, particularly in social media, because people have access to it the whole time. But even then, I wouldn't blame so much social media in terms of the platforms. The real villain, if you want to pick one, I think, is the smartphone, because that puts the kind of divisive rhetoric and the different positions and all the rest of it in people's pockets everywhere they go, every minute of every day. That is the big change, I think. The advent of the smartphone that enables people to be engaged in politics almost non-stop. I don't think it's a healthy development at all. That's why I don't actually have a smartphone.
Oh, there's a revelation. Anyway, it's an interesting way of looking at it. Has Donald Trump, who comments on everything, we all remember this, well, from the last 9 years, has he changed the culture as well as the political system?
Well, I think he's actually led a massive intellectual revolution. There are very few leaders who actually change the way people think. You can really count them on the fingers of one hand. I mean, in the UK, you saw Margaret Thatcher here, Reagan. You could go back to Goldwater in terms of the conservative revolution. Very, very few leaders do that. I think Trump has done that in terms of the intellectual basis of the Republican policy agenda, for example. In terms of the culture, I think what's fascinating about this election is how Trump has become, despite all the vitriol and the media abuse and all the rest of it, a cool figure in the culture. You have young men supporting Trump by majority over Biden. And I think a huge part of that has been the media strategy that he followed in this election, going to the places which are culturally relevant and talking in ways that fit those media. And I think that's been a real change and something. I mean, as long as I've been involved on the right of politics, people have been saying, how do we reach young people? Donald Trump has been the one to finally do it.
All right, Steve Hilton, we appreciate your insights. Thanks very much for joining us. Next on Media Buzz, the pundits were very happy to get rid of Matt Gaetz. Now they're turning on Pam Bondi for Attorney General. Stay with us.